David had been living alone in his small apartment for almost 7 months now. The place wasn't much to look at, just 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was his. After everything that happened with his marriage falling apart, he needed a space that belonged only to him. Most nights the silence felt heavy. Sometimes he would turn on the television just to hear voices, even if he wasn't really watching. The sound of other people talking made the emptiness feel less overwhelming. He had gotten used to eating dinner by himself, used to waking up to an empty bed, used to coming home to darkness. His upstairs neighbor was a mystery to him. He knew someone lived there because he could hear footsteps sometimes and occasionally the sound of music, playing softly through the thin walls. But in all these months he had only seen her a few times in the hallway. She seemed quiet, always carrying groceries or art supplies up the stairs. They would nod politely if their paths crossed, but nothing more. That Tuesday night in late October changed everything. David was already in bed, reading a book and trying to fall asleep when he heard the gentle knocking on his door. At first he thought he had imagined it. Who would be at his door at 2 a.m? The knocking came again, softer but more urgent this time. He pulled on a shirt and walked to the door, looking through the peephole. His upstairs neighbor stood in the hallway, and even through the small lens he could see she was shivering. "I'm really sorry to bother you this late," she said when he opened the door. "I know we don't really know each other, but I have a problem." She was wearing a thick sweater and pajama pants, but her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. Her name was Lisa, she told him. Her heating system had completely stopped working around midnight, and her apartment was getting colder by the minute. "I called the emergency maintenance line, but they said nobody can come out until morning," she explained. "I tried using extra blankets, but it's just too cold up there. I can't sleep." David looked at this woman he barely knew, standing in his doorway in the middle of the night asking for help. His first instinct was to be cautious. He had learned to be careful about letting people into his life, especially after his divorce. But looking at her, seeing how she was shaking from the cold, he couldn't just close the door. "Of course," he said. "Come in. You can use my couch until morning." Lisa stepped inside, and immediately he could feel the gratitude radiating from her. "Thank you so much. I really didn't know what else to do." He brought her extra blankets and a pillow, making the couch as comfortable as possible. But even with the blankets wrapped around her, he could hear her teeth chattering from his bedroom. The October night was particularly cold, and his apartment, while warmer than hers, still had that autumn chill that seemed to seep through the windows. After lying in bed for 20 minutes, listening to her shiver on his couch, David made a decision that surprised even him. "Hey," he called out softly. "This is going to sound strange, but my bed is warmer. There's room for both of us if you want to get some actual sleep." The apartment went quiet for a moment. Then he heard her voice, small and uncertain. "Are you sure? I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "It's fine," he replied. "We're both adults. You need to get warm and I have a big enough bed." He heard her footsteps approaching his room. In the dim light from the window, he could see she was still wrapped in one of his blankets. She hesitated at the edge of the bed. "I'll stay on this side," she whispered, pointing to the far edge. "I just really need to get warm." As she slipped under the covers, careful to maintain distance between them, she whispered something that would stick with him for weeks to come. "I just need some warmth." The words carried more weight than they should have. There was something in her voice that suggested she meant more than just physical warmth, though David didn't understand it yet. They lay there in the darkness, both very aware of the other person's presence. It was strange having someone in his bed again after months of sleeping alone. But it wasn't uncomfortable in the way he had expected. There was something oddly comforting about hearing another person breathing, about knowing he wasn't the only one awake in the world. Lisa fell asleep first. Her breathing became steady and peaceful, and David noticed that she had stopped shivering. The extra body heat was working. He found himself lying awake longer than usual, not because he was uncomfortable, but because something felt different. For the first time in months, the silence in his apartment didn't feel empty. When morning came, Lisa was already awake, quietly getting ready to leave. "Thank you," she said simply. "I really appreciate your kindness." "No problem," David replied. "I hope they fix your heating today." She nodded and left, and David went about his normal routine. But throughout the day, he found himself thinking about those whispered words. "I just need some warmth." Something told him this wouldn't be the last time he would hear them. That evening, as he prepared for bed, David caught himself listening for footsteps upstairs, wondering if Lisa's heating was working properly now. He told himself it was just neighborly concern, but deep down, he knew something had shifted in his carefully ordered, solitary life. He had no idea that this one act of kindness would lead to something that would change both of their lives forever. David thought that first night would be the end of it. Lisa's heating got fixed the next day and life went back to normal. For 3 days, everything was quiet upstairs. He found himself missing the small interaction they had shared. But he told himself it was just because he wasn't used to talking to people anymore. Then, on Friday night, the knocking came again. This time, Lisa looked embarrassed when he opened the door. "I'm so sorry to bother you again," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "The heating is working, but my apartment just isn't getting warm enough. I think there might be a problem with the insulation or something." David looked at her standing there in the hallway. She was wearing the same thick sweater, and he could see her breath in the cold air. Without hesitation, he stepped aside to let her in. "You don't have to explain," he said. "Come on in." This time Lisa didn't even try the couch. She went straight to his bedroom, and as she slipped under the covers, she whispered those same words, "I just need some warmth." The next week, it happened again. And then again. Each time, Lisa had a different explanation. The heating wasn't working properly. Her blankets weren't thick enough. There was a draft in her room that she couldn't figure out. David stopped asking questions and just started leaving his door unlocked after 10 o'clock. By the third week, they had developed an unspoken routine. Lisa would appear sometime between 11 and midnight. She would knock gently, he would let her in, and she would go straight to his bedroom. They would lie on opposite sides of the bed, maintaining a careful distance, and she would whisper her need for warmth before falling asleep. During the day, they barely acknowledged each other. If they passed in the hallway, Lisa would give him a quick smile and hurry past, as if she was embarrassed about their nighttime arrangement. David found this strange, but he didn't push it. He was starting to enjoy their quiet companionship, even if it only existed in the dark. His daily routine began to change in small ways. He started going to bed earlier, making sure his apartment was tidy before Lisa arrived. He bought softer sheets and extra pillows. He even started keeping a glass of water on both sides of the bed, just in case she got thirsty during the night. At work, his colleagues began noticing changes in him too. David was a high school history teacher, and for months after his divorce, he had been going through the motions. His lessons were boring, his energy was low, and he avoided the teacher's lounge where everyone gathered to chat. But now, something was different. He seemed more rested despite the fact that he was sharing his bed with someone every night. He started participating in conversations again, even laughing at jokes. When his friend Tom asked him about it, David just shrugged and said he was sleeping better. The truth was more complicated than that. Having Lisa in his bed every night was doing something to his mind that he didn't fully understand. For months, he had felt completely alone in the world. The divorce had left him feeling like he was worthless, like nobody would ever want to be around him again. But here was this woman who chose to come to him every single night, who trusted him enough to sleep beside him. It made him feel needed in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Lisa, on the other hand, remained a mystery. During their nighttime hours together, she rarely spoke except to whisper her request for warmth. Sometimes David would try to start a conversation, but she would give short answers and then pretend to fall asleep. It was like she was two different people. The quiet, polite neighbor during the day, and this vulnerable person who appeared in his bedroom at night. David started paying more attention to the sounds from upstairs during the day. He could hear Lisa moving around, working at what sounded like a desk or table. Sometimes there was music playing, always something soft and sad. Occasionally he thought he heard her crying, but he was never sure. One night, about a month into their arrangement, something different happened. Lisa arrived later than usual, around 1 in the morning. When she slipped into bed, David noticed she was shaking more than usual and not from the cold. "Are you okay?" he whispered in the darkness. For a long moment, Lisa didn't answer. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, "Some nights are just harder than others." David wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her tone told him not to push. Instead, he did something he had never done before. Without thinking about it, he reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "Whatever it is, it's okay." Lisa didn't pull away from his touch. In fact, she seemed to relax a little. They lay there in comfortable silence until she fell asleep. From that night forward, David began to understand that Lisa's need for warmth went much deeper than just being cold. There was something in her life that was causing her pain, something that made her seek comfort in the darkness of his bedroom. He didn't know what it was yet, but he was beginning to realize that helping her was helping him too. For the first time since his divorce, he felt like he had a purpose. Every night he was someone's safe place, someone's source of comfort. It was a responsibility he found himself taking very seriously. 3 weeks into their nightly routine, David finally got his answers. It happened on a Thursday night when Lisa arrived much later than usual. He had been lying in bed wondering if she was coming at all, when he heard the familiar gentle knock at almost 2 in the morning. When he opened the door, Lisa looked different. Her eyes were red and she had clearly been crying. She didn't offer her usual apology or explanation about the temperature. She just walked straight to his bedroom and climbed into bed without saying a word. They lay there in silence for what felt like hours. David could hear Lisa's breathing, shaky and uneven. He wanted to ask what was wrong, but every time he started to speak, the words seemed too loud for the quiet darkness of the room. Finally, Lisa broke the silence herself. "Today was the anniversary," she whispered, her voice barely audible. David turned slightly toward her, though he could barely make out her shape in the darkness. "Anniversary of what?" For a long moment, Lisa didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear her. "My husband died 2 years ago today." The words hit David like a physical blow. Suddenly, everything made sense. The sadness he sometimes heard through the ceiling. The way Lisa seemed to carry herself during the day like she was holding something heavy. The desperate way she whispered about needing warmth every night. "I'm so sorry," David said. And he meant it. "I had no idea." Lisa was quiet again, but this time David waited. He had learned that she would talk when she was ready, and pushing her only made her close up more. "It was a car accident," she continued after a few minutes. "He was coming home from work on a Friday evening, just like any other day. Someone ran a red light and hit him head on. He died instantly." David felt his heart breaking for this woman he barely knew, but had been sharing his bed with for weeks. "Lisa, the worst part," she interrupted, "is that I was angry at him that day. We had fought that morning about something stupid. I can't even remember what it was about now. Money, probably, or whose turn it was to do the dishes. When he left for work, I didn't even say goodbye properly." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "I spent the whole day being stubborn, planning what I was going to say to him when he got home. I was going to prove that I was right and he was wrong. And then the police came to my door instead." David didn't know what to say. What words could possibly be enough for something like that? "I haven't been able to sleep properly since it happened," Lisa went on. "Every night I lie in my bed and it feels so cold and empty. I tried everything, sleeping pills, therapy, even dating for a while. But nothing worked. The cold just stays with me." "Is that why you come here?" David asked gently. Lisa nodded, though he couldn't see it in the darkness. "The first night, when my heating really was broken, I slept better than I had in 2 years. It wasn't just that your apartment was warmer. It was that I wasn't alone. For the first time since the accident, I felt safe enough to actually sleep." David understood now why she could only talk about this in the darkness. Some truths were too heavy for daylight. "I know it's selfish," Lisa continued. "I know I'm using you, and that's not fair. But I can't handle the nights alone anymore. When I'm here with you, the cold goes away, and I can pretend for a few hours that the world isn't such a scary place." "You're not using me," David said firmly. "You're not selfish." "Yes, I am," Lisa replied. "You don't know me at all. We don't even have real conversations during the day. I just show up here every night and take up space in your bed, and you let me because you're too polite to say no." David was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to respond. When he spoke, his voice was steady and sure. "Do you know why I let you stay here every night?" he asked. Lisa didn't answer. "Because for the past 7 months since my divorce, I've felt completely invisible. My wife left me for someone else, and it made me feel like I was worth nothing to anyone. I stopped talking to my friends, stopped doing things I enjoyed, stopped believing that anyone would ever want me around again." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But every night you choose to come here, You trust me enough to sleep next to me. You make me feel like I matter to someone, even if it's just as a warm body in a bed. For the first time in months, I feel useful. I feel needed." Lisa turned toward him in the darkness. "Really?" "Really," David said. "We're helping each other, Lisa. You need warmth, and I need to feel like I have a purpose. That's not selfish, that's just human." They lay there in comfortable silence for a while, both processing what they had shared. Finally, Lisa spoke again. "I still miss him every day," she whispered. "I don't know if that will ever change." "It doesn't have to change," David replied. "Missing someone you loved isn't something you have to get over. It's something you learn to carry." "How do you know that?" David smiled sadly in the darkness. "Because I'm learning to carry my own pain too. It looks different than yours, but it's still heavy." From that night forward, their relationship changed. Lisa still came to his room every night, but now there was understanding between them. They knew why they needed each other, and they stopped pretending it was just about temperature or broken heating systems. Sometimes they would talk quietly in the darkness about their losses, their fears, their hopes for the future. Other nights they would just lie there in comfortable silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. David realized that healing didn't always look like moving on. Sometimes it looked like finding someone who understood your pain and was willing to sit with you in the darkness until morning came. As November turned into December, something started to shift between David and Lisa. What had begun as a simple arrangement for comfort was becoming something more complicated. Lisa's visits were lasting longer each night, and she was leaving later in the morning. Sometimes David would wake up and find her still there at 7 in the morning, quietly getting dressed in the dim winter light. Their conversations in the darkness had become deeper too. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears about the future. Lisa told him about her work as a freelance artist, how she painted sad, beautiful pictures that she never showed to anyone. David shared stories about his students, about the divorce, about how lonely he had felt before she started coming to his room every night. But with this growing closeness came new problems that neither of them had expected. The first sign of trouble came from Mrs. Chen, the elderly lady who lived across the hall. She had always been friendly to David, often stopping to chat when they met at the mailboxes. But one morning, as David was leaving for work, she gave him a strange look. "That young woman from upstairs," she said carefully. "She seems to visit you quite often in the evenings." David felt his face getting red. "She's just a friend," he said quickly. Mrs. Chen nodded, but her expression was skeptical. "Of course," she said. "I just hope you're being careful. People talk, you know." David knew she was right. In a small apartment building like theirs, it was impossible to keep secrets. People had started noticing Lisa's late-night visits and early morning departures. He could feel the curious looks from other neighbors, could sense the whispered conversations that stopped when he walked by. But the real complication came 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday evening that David would never forget. He was in his kitchen making dinner when there was a knock at the door. It was earlier than Lisa usually came, so he thought maybe something was wrong. When he opened the door, his heart nearly stopped. Standing in the hallway was Rebecca, his ex-wife. "Hello, David," she said, looking exactly the same as she had 6 months ago when she had moved out. "Can we talk?" David stared at her, completely shocked. "What are you doing here?" "I made a mistake," Rebecca said simply. "Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I want to try again." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. For months after the divorce, he had dreamed of this moment. He had imagined Rebecca coming back, apologizing, asking for another chance. But now that it was actually happening, he felt confused instead of happy. "I don't understand," he said. "You said you didn't love me anymore." "You said we were too different." "I was scared," Rebecca replied. "I thought I wanted something exciting and new, but I was wrong. What we had was real, David. It was good."
"Can I come in?"
"Can we talk about this properly?" David stepped aside to let her in, his mind racing. Rebecca looked around the apartment, and he suddenly saw it through her eyes. The extra pillows on the couch, the 2 coffee cups in the sink, the general sense that someone else had been spending time there. "You've redecorated," Rebecca said, though she sounded uncertain. Before David could answer, there was another knock at the door. His stomach dropped as he realized what time it was. Lisa's usual time. "Excuse me for a second," he said to Rebecca, but when he opened the door, it was too late to prevent the awkward encounter. Lisa stood in the hallway, wearing her usual nighttime clothes, pajama pants and a thick sweater. She looked past David and saw Rebecca standing in his living room, and her face went white. "Oh," Lisa said quietly. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you had company." Rebecca looked from David to Lisa, taking in Lisa's obvious bedtime attire and the uncomfortable tension in the air. Her expression changed from hope to suspicion to hurt in just a few seconds. "Who is this?" Rebecca asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. David felt trapped between the two women, unsure of what to say. He couldn't explain Lisa's presence without revealing their entire arrangement, but he also couldn't lie to Rebecca. "This is Lisa," he said finally. "She lives upstairs, and she comes to visit you at 11 o'clock at night?" Rebecca's voice was getting sharper. "In her pajamas?" Lisa stepped forward, clearly wanting to explain, but David could see the panic in her eyes. Their private safe space had suddenly been invaded by the complications of the outside world. "It's not what you think," Lisa said to Rebecca. "We're not—" "It's not like that. Then what is it like?" Rebecca demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my husband has moved on pretty quickly." "Ex-husband," David corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. The words hung in the air like a slap. Rebecca's face crumpled and Lisa took a step backward toward the door. "I should go," Lisa whispered. "I'm sorry for interrupting." "No." "Wait," David said, but Lisa was already leaving, practically running toward the stairs. David stood in his doorway, watching Lisa disappear, feeling like something precious had just been broken. When he turned back to face Rebecca, she was crying. "How could you replace me so easily?" she asked. "We were married for 5 years, David. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "Of course it means something," David said, closing the door and facing her. "But you're the one who left, Rebecca. You're the one who said we were over." "I know," she said, wiping her eyes. "I know I made mistakes. But I came back. I came back to fix things. And I find another woman leaving your apartment in the middle of the night." David realized there was no way to explain his relationship with Lisa without it sounding like exactly what Rebecca thought it was. And maybe if he was being honest with himself, the lines had become blurred. What had started as simple comfort had grown into something deeper, something he didn't fully understand himself. That night, for the first time in 2 months, David slept alone. Lisa didn't come back, and he lay awake wondering if he had lost something important before he had even realized what he had. For 3 days after the confrontation with Rebecca, Lisa didn't come to David's door. Those were the longest 3 nights David had experienced since before Lisa had first appeared in his life. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for her footsteps, hoping for her gentle knock that never came. On Saturday morning, he tried knocking on her door, but there was no answer. He could hear movement inside her apartment, so he knew she was there, but she wasn't opening the door for him. He left a note under her door that simply said, "I'm sorry. Can we please talk?" Rebecca had stayed for 2 hours that Wednesday night, crying and pleading for another chance. David had listened to everything she said, but his heart wasn't in the conversation. All he could think about was Lisa running up the stairs, the look of panic and embarrassment on her face. When Rebecca finally left, promising to call him in a few days, David felt empty in a way he hadn't felt since the early days after their divorce. But this emptiness was different. This time, he wasn't mourning the end of his marriage. He was mourning the loss of something new, something that had been helping him heal. Sunday night came and went with no sign of Lisa. David barely slept, worried about how she was doing, whether she was managing to sleep at all without their arrangement. He remembered her telling him about the nightmares, about the cold that seemed to come from inside her bones. Monday was the worst day yet. At school, David found himself distracted and irritable. His students noticed his mood, and one of them even asked if he was feeling okay. He realized he had become dependent on Lisa's presence in a way that went far beyond just enjoying the company. She had become part of his routine, part of his healing process. That evening, David made a decision. If Lisa wouldn't answer her door, he would wait for her outside the building. He knew she had to leave eventually, even if it was just to buy groceries. He didn't have to wait long. Around 6 o'clock, Lisa came down the stairs carrying a small bag of art supplies. When she saw him standing by the front door of the building, she froze. "Lisa," he said gently, "please don't run away again." She looked like she might bolt anyway, but something in his voice made her stop. David, I can't do this anymore, she said quietly. What happened the other night? It made me realize how strange our situation really is. Strange doesn't mean wrong, David replied. What we have helps both of us. You know that. Lisa shook her head. Your wife wants you back. Your real wife. I'm just some broken woman who's been using you as a substitute for what I lost. Ex-wife, David corrected, just like he had 3 nights before. And you're not using me, Lisa. We've been through this, and haven't we? She asked. Be honest, David, if your wife hadn't shown up, would we have continued this arrangement forever? Would we have ever tried to build something real? Or would we have just kept hiding in the darkness, pretending we were helping each other? David didn't have an immediate answer, and Lisa saw his hesitation. That's what I thought, she said sadly. I need to learn how to sleep alone, David. I need to figure out how to deal with my grief without depending on someone else to make it bearable. And I need to figure out what I really want, David admitted. But that doesn't mean we have to lose each other completely. Lisa looked at him for a long moment. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we've been approaching this all wrong, David said. Maybe instead of only talking in the dark, we could try being friends in the daylight too. Maybe we could go for coffee sometime, or you could show me some of your paintings. You want to see my paintings? Lisa asked, surprised. I want to know you as a whole person, David said, not just the woman who appears in my bedroom at midnight. I want to understand what makes you happy, what you dream about, what you do when you're not grieving. For the first time in days, Lisa smiled a little. Most of my paintings are pretty sad, she warned. That's okay, David said. Sad can be beautiful too. They went to a small coffee shop around the corner, and for the first time ever, David and Lisa had a conversation in full daylight. It was awkward at first. They were so used to talking in whispers in the darkness that normal conversation felt strange. But as the evening went on, they began to relax. Lisa told him about her art, about how painting helped her process her emotions. David told her about his students, about the satisfaction he got from teaching young people about history. I have an idea, David said as they were finishing their coffee. What if we tried a different arrangement? Instead of you coming to my room every night, what if you came over twice a week? We could watch a movie or just talk, or you could bring your art supplies and paint while I grade papers. Lisa considered this. And on the other nights? On the other nights, we both try to sleep alone, David said. We learn to be okay by ourselves, but we also know that we have someone who cares about us. What about your ex-wife? Lisa asked. David was quiet for a moment. Rebecca and I are over, he said finally. I realized that when I saw you running up those stairs. I was more worried about losing you than I was excited about getting her back. That tells me everything I need to know about what I really want. Lisa nodded slowly. Okay, she said. We can try that. But David? Yeah? If this gets complicated again, if either of us starts to feel like we're using the other person or avoiding dealing with our real problems, we need to be honest about it. Deal, David said. 6 months later, David and Lisa had settled into their new routine. Lisa came over twice a week, sometimes to talk, sometimes to work on her art while David cooked dinner. She was seeing a therapist again, learning to cope with her grief in healthier ways. David had started dating occasionally, nothing serious, but he was open to the possibility of finding love again. Some nights Lisa still stayed over, but now it was a choice rather than a desperate need. She would curl up on one side of David's bed, and he would lie on the other side, and they would talk quietly about their weeks, their hopes, their slowly healing hearts. I still need your warmth sometimes, Lisa would whisper on those nights. I know, David would whisper back, and I still need to feel needed sometimes. We make a good team, Lisa would say, and David would smile in the darkness, knowing that they had found something rare, a friendship built on mutual healing, mutual understanding, and the simple human need for connection in a world that could often feel unbearably cold.